Alrighty, friends. Yesterday we looked at using bar models, which I was calling candy bars, and least common multiples to figure out if um, numbers, which one was greater, which fraction was greater when we're comparing fractions. Today I'm going to show you another strategy, which I use the most often, and it's using benchmark fractions to compare. And the benchmarks that I think about are a half and a whole, right? So I'm always thinking about how do these fractions compare to a half and a whole. So if we think here, eighths, how many eighths would be equivalent to a half? Well, we need the top number to be half of the bottom. So 1/2, 4/8 would be equivalent. So this is much smaller to a half. In fact, it's really close to 0 because we only have 1/8. Then I want to think about 6. How many 6 would be a half? Well, 3/6 would be a half because the 3 is half of the 6. So this number is actually larger than a half because 3/6 is a half and this is 4/6. So 4/6 is definitely bigger than 1/8 because 1/8 is close to 0 and 4/6 is larger than a half. Let's take a look at this one, okay? So we're thinking about 7/10. How many tenths would be a half? Well, 5/10 would be a half because the numerator is half of the denominator. Okay, so 7/10 is actually 2/10 larger than a half. So they've got it up here on the number line. Here's our half, and 7/10 is larger. Then I think about 12ths. How many 12ths would be a half? Well, 6/12 would be a half. So this fraction is actually a 12th smaller than a half, a little smaller than a half, because we could put 6/12 right here. It's equivalent to a half, and 5/12 is a little smaller. So 7/10 is greater than 5/12. Okay, 1/4 and 6/8. Well, how many fourths is equivalent to a half? Well, 2/4 is equivalent than a half. So 2/4 would go right here under a half, and we have 1/4 left. So 1/4 is less than a half. How many eighths is a half? Well, 4/8 is a half. So 6/8 is greater than a half. 6/8 is greater than a half. It's actually 2/8 greater because 4/8 is a half. There's our 6/8. Okay, 3/5 and 1/3. Now these get a little harder because you have to split odd numbers in half, but we can still do it. So 2 and a half is what is half of 5. What's half of 3? Well, 1 and a half, right? So we know this 3 is greater than 2 and a half. So 3/5 is greater than a half. Whereas 1/2, which is the 1/3, right, is 1.5 is equivalent to a half. And this is only 1. So we see it's less than a half. So 3/5 is greater than a half. 1/3 is less than a half. Because 1.5 over 3 would be the half. So 3/5 is greater than 1/3. Go ahead, pause the video. Actually, let's do a few together. And then we'll pause the video and try it out, okay? I'm going to make a little circle here to say which one's greater because I don't have a greater than less than symbol that I like to use yet. I'm going to fill, and make it yellow so you can see it. Okay, so 5/8 are 4/10. Well, let's think about halves. How many eighths are a half? 4/8 are a half. So this fraction is greater than a half. How many tenths are a half? 5/10 are a half. So this fraction is less than a half. So you would be doing the greater than sign to the 5/8 because it's greater than a half. And I'm going to make a copy of that symbol. And let's take a look at our next one. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Move it over here. 3/12 compared to 12/20. Well, how many 12ths would be a half? 6/12 would be a half. So this is smaller than a half because it's only 3/12. How many 20ths would be a half? 10/20 would be a half because 10 is half of 20. And this is 12/20. So it's actually greater than 1/2. Well, 12/20 is greater than 3/12 because it's bigger than a half. How about 14/16 or 3/6? Well, what should we think to ourselves first? Well, 8/16 would be a half, and so 14/16 is greater. Okay, so because 14 is much greater than 8/16. 3/6 is actually equivalent to a half. It actually is a half. If I have a pizza split into 6 pieces and I'm talking about 3 of them, it's greater. Okay? 4/8 or 11/22. I love this one. How many eighths would be a half? Well, 4/8 is a half, so that is a half. What's half of 22? 11, right? So these are both equivalent to a half, so we'd put the equal sign in the middle. Pause the video, go ahead and try these, and then unpause it and check your work. Okay, go ahead and check your work with mine. So I had 6/18 is greater than 1/6, 8/24 is greater than 4/6. No, that is incorrect. Why did Mrs. Camp do that? Because half of 24 would be 12, whereas half of 6 would be 3. Whew, see, you make mistakes. I love it. Learning a lot. 15/20 is greater than 6/14. 8/10 is greater than 1/8. This was a tricky one. 4/9 is greater than 12/30. I say it's tricky because they were both less than a half, but this one was closer to a half. 14/26, that's a little bit more than a half because 13/26 would be a half, whereas this one's right at a half. These are equivalent. 18 is half of 36, 6 is half of 12, so they're both equivalent to a half. And remember, 1/9 is greater because the bigger, the numerators are the same, the bigger the denominator, actually the smaller it is, because this is like 1 out of 9 pieces, whereas this is 1 out of 10 pieces. Great work, friends.